Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of All Nighter Discussions. It is I, your host, Gabe Tice, joined once again by my good friend, President CM, the only president in America with a high approval rating. President CM, how are you doing?
Hanging in there. I appreciate you shouting out my impeccable record and approval ratings. I am off the charts around the world. So thank you, thank you very much for highlighting that. How you doing, Gabe?
I'm good. I'm good. You're also the only president in America's history to not commit war crimes. So again, I just
Yet,
I, I want to highlight that for the audience.
not yet. We're
Oh
working on
no,
it.
are you gonna firebomb the Evil Dead 2 fans?
Oh, that might be a good idea, just so they don't come after me. We'll see. I mean, that
We
no, no, definitely not. Nobody's gonna know anything.
Okay. Wow, we had a full confession here already, and we're not even a minute in. Okay, so this is going to be a fun episode. This is going to be a wild episode because President CM and I are talking about the best Evil Dead movie. The best. It's the best one that they have made so far, and probably will be for me for a good while. We're talking about Army of Darkness.
And might I say, the culmination of our three-part Evil Dead reviews, or discussions. Very excited to get into it.
Yeah, this is going to be epic. This is going to be an epic of biblical proportions, just like Army of Darkness. Um,
I like it.
and I think we've talked about how there's no negativity or toxicity in the Evil Dead fandom, but if there were, I think I would be accused of heresy because I think this is most people's least favorite, probably.
Is it?
Well, I think it's the one people talk about the least because it is not a horror movie, right?
Well, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, it's not. For better and for worse, it's not. So I think horror fans who really love those first two kind of they have this weirder relationship with it. I don't think it's an unpopular movie. There's definitely no like Army of Darkness hate group out there that I'm aware of, but it's definitely the one that I think people are the most distanced from. Plus, it's really different because it has a big budget. They worked with a big studio, and that affected a lot of choices. I'll put it that way. We can talk more about that later. But yeah, it's been my favorite ever since I saw it. I don't know about you, but I saw it a few years ago. No, actually, more recently. I saw it like a year ago because I had seen the first two, and it's just one of those things. I hadn't gotten around to watching Army of Darkness, so I get the Shout Factory version, put it on, and I just it's everything I love Sam Raimi for, man. Everything that I really liked about Evil Dead 2, everything I love about his, well, not everything, but so much of what I love about his Spider-Man movies, just it had a sense of adventure. It had this super likable, super charismatic, super funny leading character in Ash. It was just wild. It was creative. It was, even though it was big budget, it was like not like any other blockbuster. Like he was doing things that no other director in that world would think of. Like who would put a Three Stooges gag in the middle of their sword and sandal blockbuster, right? Sam Raimi would. So why don't you tell me your journey with this movie, where it lands for you, and then all of that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Army of Darkness. So I was also, I think we've discussed this, like a little later to the Evil Dead franchise. I didn't necessarily grow up with it. But what I honestly, the first one that I owned on Blu-ray was Army of Darkness before I'd even seen the movie. I knew what it was, and I saw it available. It was I'm not even kidding, it was like $2.99 at in a Best Buy bargain bin. And I was like, yeah, I'm picking this up. For some reason, they couldn't sell it, and I purchased it. This was maybe pretty close to the start of my collection, so I'd say probably about 6 years ago. Um, Watched it not too long after, and I really enjoy it. Truthfully, I really like it, and I put it above Evil Dead 2. But I think there's this charm to the first Evil Dead that puts it ahead of it. And I'm not going to get into what my favorite Evil Dead film is, but it's a certain requel that we're not talking about.
Oh
Uh,
no.
yeah. I
Doing this
am the
podcast.
divisive man. But honestly, like talking about the original films. In the best way that I can. Honestly, like this movie is so much fun, and it is it is one that I could pretty much recommend to just about anybody. Honestly, I think anybody would have fun with it. So, but my journey is that I absolutely love this movie. I was a little late to the party, just as I was with the rest of the Evil Dead franchise, but very excited to get into a discussion about it because it is one hell of a fun ride.
Okay. Let's get this out of the way with the requel, okay? Because we're not going to do a whole episode on that. I'll just share my thoughts on that real quick since I think we have to touch on it. It's really good for a requel. I totally get why some people put it above the original because it just has more production value. It just kind of learned from the stumbles of that first movie, and it just has a more modern flavor, a more accessible flavor, and I get that. But those are all negatives for me personally because I think the first movie actually, the charm is about all of those limitations they had, all of the student filmmaking qualities. That's what I find so charming about the original. So I would put it in the upper echelon of remakes, reboots, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think it competes with any of the original movies for me. So that's my quick little thing about the requel.
I respect that.
Yeah. Although, you know what? Let me just say this. It probably does actually scare me more than any of the original movies.
I can definitely respect that. It definitely to me is more. It's what I'll say. The word I like to use the word frightening with this film. Um, with not with our with Army of Darkness, by the way, with the
Like, boy,
requel.
if you're frightened by
Um,
this movie,
no, yeah, you
uh,
got problems if you're frightened by Army of Darkness. But for the requel, I like to use frightening because it's just there's just a lot of frightening imagery and scenes, and um, there's a lot of reasons that I could get into about why I like it so much. I can definitely see how somebody would not like it nearly as much as me. I can see how somebody would absolutely hate it. Truthfully, it's just one of those movies that lands with me. But at the same token, so is Army of Darkness. So is the original Evil Dead. I'm so pumped to get into the discussion about this. And so let's get it rolling.
let's do it. Okay, so it's 1991. Sam Raimi has done his first studio movie, Darkman. And this is going to sound funny to people, but Darkman really launched his didn't launch his career. It launched, let's say, a phase of his career that he would continue, Spider-Man and on of being a big budget studio filmmaker. Darkman was a modest hit. It made enough money that he had this clout. He could go and finally make that third Evil Dead movie he wanted to make. He's always wanted to make this story happen. Ash going back in time to the medieval ages. That's why Evil Dead 2 ends, on that cliffhanger. So it took Darkman to happen, but now he's able to go and work with Universal to bring the movie to life. But with that comes stipulations. Namely, and this is going to sound so weird, and I still can't explain why this happened, but Universal said that he could not name it Evil Dead, anything. They could not put Evil Dead in the title. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it seems like one of those. And let's be real, okay? Universal since let's go all the way back to the Universal monster movies. That's about the last time that they handled horror very well.
Oh,
Um,
snap.
because let's be real. I mean, so Army of Darkness that was definitely a terrible decision, not allowing Evil Dead in the title. Universal is also the studio that refused to release House of a Thousand Corpses. They produced it, They filmed it on Universal lot on the back lots at Universal. So it's like there have been many instances of when they tried to kind of dip into horror, and it honestly hasn't gone too well for them. So I would say horrible decision. I don't see why they would do something like that.
See, I have this idea because, oh, and by the way, Universal produced Darkman. That's why they're the ones who ultimately did Army of Darkness. They worked with Sam Raimi on Darkman. But Universal wants to be a very prestigious studio, and they have a very old-fashioned way of thinking. And the mindset they probably have is that horror movies like The Evil Dead are trashy, sleazy. Even if they make a lot of money, they don't want to be associated with that kind of thing. So even though they had a potential moneymaker on their hands, they didn't want the association with the Evil Dead brand. Why they then would make an Evil Dead sequel, I don't know. And like they literally hurt the movie. The movie didn't make as much money as it would have had the marketing emphasized that it was another Evil Dead movie. So that is a very unfortunate part of this whole story. It's like Universal just botched it. From that decision onward, they just kind of, I don't want to say doomed the movie because it's a cult classic, but in its box office records, they definitely hurt it.
Yeah, I would say they doomed the movie Doom when they made that, but no, with this one, I think it was an unfortunate decision. I would have loved it to be called like, even if they did like a sort of similar to like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, where it was Leatherface, like something that still had that Evil Dead title, like Army of Darkness, Evil Dead 3, something like that.
Oh, they would have called it. They would have called it the Medieval Dead.
Oh, see, now that would have been. See, I didn't
Perfect.
know that, and I'm. I said this before we got started today. I'm not a big trivia guy for this film, not for the franchise as a whole, but especially not Army of Darkness. So that is a very good title. I would like to see a cover for that and replace it in my Army of Darkness Blu-ray that I have.
Yeah, and some fans I think do call it that. Just because that was Sam Raimi's vision, and Army of Darkness was Universal's decision. And the other big thing is that this movie got delayed at the wazoo. It was, I think it was shot in 1991. It wasn't released until, okay, 1993, but there was a whole delay because Universal was, they didn't want to give the funds to complete the movie because, and I'm reading this, so bear with me, because they wanted to buy the sequel rights for Silence of the Lambs. That's what I'm reading. So
Boy.
that's just weird. Because Sam Raimi needed $3 million left. I don't know how common this is for studios to just leave their filmmakers hanging like that. I hope it's not often, but yeah, the movie got delayed, and um, Sam Raimi's had some really bad experiences with studios before, so he was probably pretty nervous. But they got the money, they finished the movie. It was, I mean, it made its money back. It just wasn't a big hit, but it has gone on to be one of the most celebrated movies of his career and Bruce Campbell's career. Because Bruce Campbell is a legend in this movie. He's only gotten better throughout all of these films, and here he gets to God tier in this movie. Am I right?
Oh yeah, top of the line. I mean, best he's been in the franchise so far, and possibly the best he's ever been.
No, I think he's great in Ash versus Evil Dead, because they built off of this. I mean, this is where they defined the character of Ash, that we really understand him. You know, um,
Definitive Ash.
yeah, the definitive Ash. I mean, this movie is endlessly quotable. I mean, and it's just funny as fuck. Like we were talking about Evil Dead 2, the humor maybe it landed, maybe it didn't. But this movie, I mean, I think we can both agree that it's just hysterical from beginning to end.
Very funny. It's almost everything but horror, but in a like in a good way and in a bad way. The funny, oh my, like it just adds to the thrill. It just adds to the thrill of everything, and absolutely, absolutely love it. It's so I oh, I can't even say it. It's very, very funny.
So let me ask you, President CM, um, why this humor lands with you, but not so much in Evil Dead 2.
I tried to think about that a little bit before we got started because I remembered our discussion, and just having Evil Dead 2 not land as well. And I think it's the delivery for me. It's while it's delivered in a similar way, I think it's just different enough that it lands for me, and it's acted out and delivered in a slightly different way, in a slightly better way for me. I think it just comes down to the execution of the jokes. I just think they're much more well executed. Maybe it's the environment. Man, I was trying to think about it, and I honestly, I think it just comes down to the delivery, but I can't even say that for sure. It's very, it's a very strange phenomenon for me. I had a hard time thinking about that earlier today, trying to figure out what's different.
Well, the difference is there's no horror. There's no pretense of horror. There are visuals that I think would fit in a horror movie, and I think I think those instincts of the splatter house and the grind house are still very
Mhm.
much with him,
Right.
but he's like making it a joke officially. I feel like Evil Dead 2, it's almost like he was testing the waters, like, will the audience like this, like, and they did. So he kind of cannonballed. He kind of like made that the movie next time, because I think honestly, I think he enjoyed that part of making Evil Dead 2 more than he liked the horror, the thriller parts.
I could definitely see that. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it was just the commitment to make the movie that sort of went full on with what they were trying to sort of dabble with in Evil Dead 2. Maybe it just worked better because of they just committed. They just committed to it. I think
Right.
that makes a lot of sense.
Also, it has a new story. It's not just a retread of the first movie.
It feels much less like a parody of Evil Dead 1 than Evil Dead 2 does.
Yeah, because it is it's inspired by uh, what's it called? The Mark Twain novel, uh, can, something like, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I've heard of it, but you if you think I'm gonna grab that out of thin air, it's not coming. I don't know. Uh, not a literary genius over here, I'll tell you that much.
Etiquette Yankee and King Arthur's Court. Okay. So it's very inspired by that, but the decision to take a horror franchise in this direction was very unique, and I doubt that anybody saw that coming. Like, you're watching Evil Dead 2, he goes through the portal. What's going to happen next? And he arrives in like medieval times. I think that must have been very surprising, and even more surprising for them to commit to the gag and make a whole movie of it. So that's the thing about Sam Raimi. He's always committed to the gag.
Yep. For better or for worse, most of the time for better.
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, but even like emo Peter Parker,
Yeah.
he committed.
Yeah. Yes, he did. He certainly did commit.
Now, I think the other thing that really gives this movie a charm for me is it is a complete homage to like the Ray Harryhausen era of B movies. The stop motion effects. There's literally a reference to the day the Earth stood still with
Mhm.
Klaatu, Barada, and Nikto, which is one of the funniest goddamn things. One of the best homages in the history of movies. It's like Klaatu, Barada, Nikto.
Oh God, I love it. I love it so much. Give me all of it.
Yeah, and of course, like the best homages, it still stands on its own. If you didn't know that, if you didn't know it was an homage, it would work fine.
It's still funny.
Exactly. Um, let me get this one negative out of the way. I guess there's kind of two negatives. One that is, let's say, a real negative, and one that's a soft negative. I do think the supporting cast here is pretty weak, right?
I can definitely agree with that. That was one of my biggest negatives. I felt like it was pretty weak around Ash. I felt like his back must have hurt after that one from carrying the entire film by
Well,
himself.
it's funny because he's carried all of these movies,
Yes.
but this one felt the most. It felt the most like a problem here because he's a fish out of water. He's surrounded by characters from another time period. It just feels like there should be more interesting stuff happening around him, you know,
Yeah.
but it doesn't play like that. It plays like the Bruce Campbell show still.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think it could have been a good opportunity to give us some supporting characters that would really help like drive the story along and feel like they're driving the story along,
Mhm.
instead of being along for the Ash Williams ride.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he does fight with these people. He has to work with these people. But you know, there's that kind of um, mainstream action movie sort of thing where, oh, the guy is not getting along with the team and the team has to learn to work together. And
Mhm.
that's like the point of the movie is like, oh, he learned to work with others. Call it cheesy, but I think that totally would have fit in this movie. I think that would have given the movie a lot more in terms of like real stakes for the characters. Because it's not like I was really worried for Ash. It just felt like this fun ride, this adventure.
I agree completely. And it didn't feel that way for any of the other characters either. I feel like there had to have been a certain point where, like we've seen it in movies before where the enemies or the forced enemies or whatever you want to call it have to work together. And like you said, it's pretty. It was. I mean, it was an action trope at one point. I don't know how many action films still have that in there, but um, the odd couple pairing could have worked really well. I think this was a good opportunity if they're taking that departure from how the first two films were in their. Um, I mean, it's a completely different genre of movie. I felt like this was the perfect opportunity to kind of introduce one of those characters, whether it be a funny, zany character or somebody who is a little bit more deadpan and serious, almost like delivering lines like not use the same actor, but like how Leslie Nielsen would deliver his lines, very deadpan. Something, just give us something to run with. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm a little disappointed that wasn't there, but
Leslie,
I'm with you.
that's a really good point of comparison. I mean, because Leslie Nielsen played it straight, he played off the macho image really well, and that's a similar thing that Bruce Campbell is doing, but he gets very different effects.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean this movie really reminded me a lot of Kurt Russell from Big Trouble in Little China.
That's an interesting comparison. I didn't think about that.
I think somebody else made that comparison. It might have been Red Letter Media, but yeah, it's right there, right? The macho all American hero who thinks he's a badass, but he's actually a doofus. But in Ash's case, he actually is a badass. Like he's goofy, but also still a badass. But correct me if I'm wrong. Um, I just remember Kurt Russell being literally incompetent. Like he did not actually accomplish anything.
Um, I mean, I would say he still has that level of being somewhat of a badass, almost like the situations are kind of put in there accident like he's accidentally being a badass while he's trying to act like one. I would say it's much more pronounced with Ash being like an actual like basically like a dumbass who kicks ass, and that's sort of it's much more pronounced in this movie than it would be in Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah. Okay. But I think you could say that Big Trouble in Little China just it set that idea up. And
Yeah, I would say so.
yeah, it definitely it's just something that we have built off of, you know, time and time again. It's just a very popular archetype now. But this movie and Big Trouble in Little China, I think, are the forefathers of that.
I can agree with that. And that's like looking at movies now. I mean, like even Marvel is borrowing from that well at times. So like to see that kind of carried on, you have to look back at movies like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's overused now.
Overuse is an understatement there. I would completely agree. But
Yeah.
I mean,
You
just
know
to
what I
see
mean?
how much, yeah, no, I mean, like there are definitely, I think the mark of quality might not be there for all the projects, but when it is done well, it's cool to see hints of something like Big Trouble in Little China or Army of Darkness. Um, something that was kind of set up in these films, and maybe it wasn't, completely new, but the way that lines are delivered now and the way that they are in films nowadays, I think you can draw direct comparisons to these two films, whatever you want to.
I'll put it this way: Chris Pratt would not have a career without this movie.
God, I'm glad you said it because I was dancing around it. I was dancing around it. That's his whole career now. After Parks and Rec, that's him now.
No Star Lord, no Jurassic Park sequels without
Yeah,
this.
completely agree with that. That is exactly what I was gonna say. I didn't want to say it. I didn't know if it was gonna be controversial. I've already done enough to send the mob towards your show. So thank you for being the one to say it because I
Well,
wanted to.
I am among those who do not like Chris Pratt, so I'm very comfortable saying that.
Ah, okay. Okay, I'm neutral, so I'm happy that somebody with a stronger opinion delivered it because I would have been much more weary
Yeah, I mean, I don't
with
like
what
him
I said.
personally, right? I mean, that's my thing. I don't like him personally.
Understandable. I'll say that much.
Yeah. Uh, okay, cool. We touched on politics. We did that. Let's cross that off the check mark.
Yeah.
Um,
Reasons the mob is coming for us. Check.
yeah. No, there was another thing I wanted to say, and this really isn't that big of a deal, but it's toned down a lot. It's very it feels family friendly in comparison to the first two.
No, I completely agree with that. It's like now, don't get me wrong. There's definitely parts in it that I could see why somebody would not want to show their kids, but
I'm gonna show my
comparatively,
yeah.
um,
On
it's
the
it's
day my
much
kid is
more.
born, the TV's gonna be there, the Blu-ray's gonna be there. I'm
Yeah.
gonna be like, all right, kid.
Now's the time you become a man. No, it really is one of those movies that like, it's just I keep going back to the same word and I feel lazy doing it, but it's just fun. It goes away from a lot of the serious or frightening or like fear related uh, moments that you see in the first two Evil Dead films, more so in the first one, I'd say. I would definitely say, but it just it doubles down on the things that it wanted to do, and man, it's just, I completely agree with you. It's much more friendly, and it's much more I think accessible. I think that makes it more accessible for fans who aren't necessarily like horror hounds to maybe get into horror a little bit as like a transition film, personally, because it's got those elements, but it's not a horror movie.
Yeah, it's like a gateway drug, you know?
I agree. It's a good starting. It's a good starting point. Then you can gradually get like scarier and scarier because this isn't scary. It's very easy to digest and get through. There's films that I would put just after this in that type of horror elements, and then you just slowly get into it. I think this is like the perfect starting point.
Although
Um,
now I pose this situation to you. Somebody watches this movie, they love it, it's so fun, it's so campy and goofy. They're like, okay, I'm gonna go watch the first one, and then they see a woman get raped by a tree. So
well, honestly, if somebody's just getting into horror, maybe watch them in reverse.
yeah, yeah, that's hmm. I
I
would
mean,
say
the
so.
story goes backwards, but I mean, the way that you transition, I mean, it's almost like you're regressing from the horror elements. So if you watched it backwards, it would be progressing into those horror elements. Give you a little bit of a breather in between.
Yeah, it's just interesting that as he got older, the more he wanted to, I guess, he wanted to start making movies that his kids could see or his family could see. I don't know. It's an
That
interesting thing
that
about.
does happen sometimes with directors. There's some directors that just end up making whatever they want for as long as they want. I mean, we I think we can both agree that the day that Quentin Tarantino makes a G-rated film is the day that the world ends. But um, there are some directors where you can see them sort of transition to from adult-oriented content or from a more. I mean, even like think and it was for different reasons, but like when you watch the first Star Wars compared to the last George Lucas well, maybe not the last one, but when it got to like the prequels, I mean, it was much more geared towards children, and it just you can see that transition for many filmmakers. I think over time, some
Was
of
it?
them like to stay. Well, see, that's what I mean. If you go by the last one in the prequel trilogy, then maybe not. I think that was meant to be a much more darker film,
But
but
even the Phantom Menace, it's about trade regulation.
well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely got some stuff in there that just doesn't belong. But I mean, even like think about like the marketability, like starting with Empire Strikes Back, it started to get a lot more. I'm going to use a term that's inside baseball for us toy collectors out there, but they started having more toyetic characters in there,
Oh,
ones that
sure.
you'd want to collect and make toys out of. And by Return of the Jedi, you got the Ewoks, and then Jar Jar Binks is very much geared towards the kids when you get to Phantom Menace and some of the creatures they introduce, the vehicles, pod racing, all things that connect to a younger audience. He's not the only director to do this. But you can see sort of that transition with Sam Raimi. He definitely included some more, he definitely kept his adult orientation, but it got more tame when it came to the more serious stuff. And I appreciate that. His films are easily enjoyable for a lot of different age groups. And
Now
that's amazing.
here's something I wanted to talk about, right? Why does it not feel like Sam Raimi is selling out with this movie? Because it's kind of got the let's say the qualities that you would find in a movie where you would accuse somebody of selling out, right? Hardcore horror director working with a big studio, took his super iconic, um, gory monster demon possession movie and turned it into, adventures in medieval time, right? So I don't think it is selling out, but it's going to be a really interesting discussion of why does he escape that accusation.
So when it comes down to honestly for me in what makes him not feel like a sellout with a movie like this, and it's really hard to explain if somebody's never seen a movie that's made by Sam Raimi. um, but I think there's two things that are very unique when you watch his films, not necessarily just unique to him. I think other filmmakers can put their touch on a movie and it just works. But I think for Sam Raimi, his touches are his he just has this flair, he has this heart, and this just atmosphere that's around his movies. And I think the day that he makes a movie that doesn't have that is the day that people will say that he did sell out. But if he makes a movie that it seems like he finds a way to care and he puts it in the film. And I mean, I think to me, that's why it doesn't feel like a sellout film for me, because it still has that Sam Raimi feel. It doesn't feel like somebody took his material, made it into something else. It doesn't feel like they threw his name on there as a director, even though he spent 90% of the movie vacationing while his AD took over and took over the entire movie. That's not what it feels like. Um, it feels like a Sam Raimi movie still, despite the changes and the increase in budget. It felt like an upgrade rather than a sellout. To me, I don't know if I'm crazy in that. Maybe for some people they consider it a sellout, but that's my opinion on why it's not. It doesn't feel like a sellout to me. Would you say something similar to that, or?
Hell yes. Hell yes. Now it's really interesting for me as somebody who again grew up with the Spider-Man movies. This is Sam Raimi to me. This was like, ah, yes,
Yeah.
like his sense of humor, his love for adventure, um, and again the decisions he makes that nobody else would make. Uh, again, like the standard for me is that scene in Spider-Man 2 where Peter Parker is just Peter Parker again, and raindrops are falling on my head is playing, and then we do this corny freeze frame. People roast him for that shit, and I love it. He is so not afraid to be corny or be accused of being silly. Like he has so much love in his heart. That's Sam Raimi. So yeah, I think from where I'm coming from, man, this is Sam Raimi. This is what he loves to do. Now, I think if you go through the linearity of his career, I think he's experimenting. I think
Hmm.
he wants to. I think he found something he really liked in Evil Dead 2. I think he wanted to build on that, and just yeah, and he never started with the intention of being a horror director. That was not his goal. So he's really actually taking control of his career and making the kind of movie that he wants to make. And I understand the studio was not super cooperating with him on a lot of choices, but as I understand it, the end result is still his movie. Like he still considers this his film, and I think he's very proud of it.
And as he should be. And even with like, yeah, when you look at his career from the beginning, like you said, I mean, there's you see him start out in this sort of humble beginning as a small time horror director in a movie that I almost call it one of the miracle movies that you don't know how and why the stars aligned to get it to where it was so that it had the opportunity to take off, but you know why it took off. And there's a few movies that I think fall into that category for better or for worse. This in this case for better with the original Evil Dead film. But I think even with the first film, you see an opportunity to expand and an opportunity for growth. And I that's why, like, as you continue to watch his movies, you almost feel a sense of pride that he's doing something bigger and something grander, as opposed to feeling like, oh man, like what happened to all that low budget corniness that we saw in the first movie and the second movie? What happened to all of that? It feels like you're like, okay, look at you, you're moving up. Okay, this is what I like to see. And then as you get bigger and as you do bigger things, um, that touch is still there. He never loses who he is, how he directs. Um, and it just, I don't know if it can be explained in the same way to people who, don't know the Evil Dead franchise at all. Uh, but he's just Sam Raimi.
That he is. That he is. Now, there's an interesting thing with this movie, in Ash versus Evil Dead. I don't understand why the Evil Dead franchise keeps running into all these legal issues, but this is real. So for the first season of Ash versus Evil Dead, they could not reference this movie at all.
Was
Like,
that a Universal thing or?
yeah, Universal would not give them the rights to reference this at all. Like, show footage, even just allude to the events that happened in it. So fans were really wondering about that. It was weird. And then season two, Universal finally gave up the rights, and we were back to normal. But again, it's just so weird how all of these movies are owned by different people. So it's one of those franchises that it doesn't really play out in a linear fashion. It's just
Yeah.
like one individual movie after another. Even though this does pick up where Evil Dead 2 left off, tonally, it's so different that yeah, it technically the story is linear, but the experience of watching it is not.
Yeah, I mean, I can
I don't
I can
know.
feel that.
Okay.
No, for sure. I was just, like I think there's a few franchises that sort of I kind of get that way. horror franchises are unique in that way in some aspects because I think a lot of action films tend to stay in their general area. Sometimes they'll change studios and it'll feel different and it'll feel sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. But horror, I mean, look at like one of the biggest horror franchises, Halloween, even like when you watch, Halloween 1 and 2, and then you watch Halloween 3 or, I'm sorry, 4 and 5. Um, those are completely different films in how they feel and
Are they?
act.
Oh,
So 4 and 5 feel like their own thing, and 1 and 2 feel like their own thing, but they don't
oh,
have a very similar. Like even 2, I think feels a little bit different. It fits well with 1, but that's when Universal, surely enough, sort of picked up some of the rights to it. So that and 2 and 3 were what Universal was involved in, from what I understand.
gotcha.
Um, and so, but even with that, like even going back to the Evil Dead franchise, and it can kind of draw comparisons, and definitely not to a full extent, but what's going on with at the time of recording with the Friday the 13th franchise and the big lawsuit that's been unfolding with the rights to that movie. I'm
Oh
very
man,
glad that Evil Dead did not fall into that pit. That
that's
most of the stuff stayed in the same area, because that's it's been really unfortunate to watch that, and it's great that such a beloved franchise like Evil Dead did not get too caught up in some kind of legal issues about rights. It makes me happy to see. It's still unfortunate that we saw what we did. I was unaware of that. I did not watch Ash versus Evil Dead yet, but um, I'm
yeah.
glad to see it was resolved.
So looking at Sam Raimi's career after he did this, he did uh, The Quick and the Dead. Have you ever seen that?
I have a lot of interest in watching it. I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet. I'm a big Western fan. I'm a huge Western movies fan, especially ones that are more the spaghetti Western style, a little bit less of the boring stuff, a little bit more of the fun stuff.
Oh,
I
you'll
like
definitely
those a
like
lot.
that.
So I'm really excited to watch it. Haven't seen it yet. How did you feel about it overall?
No, I thought it was great. I thought he honored the genre, the traditions of the genre really well, but still, Sam Raimi movie. His camera movements, his I guess his affinity for heightened realism. It's definitely not trying to be a gritty um, revisionist western. It is pulp, and he's having a lot of fun with it. But I think it's being driven by some really great performances by Gene Hackman and Russell Crowe, Sharon Stone, Leonardo DiCaprio. You could argue that's the best cast he's ever worked with.
I mean, overall, that's a fantastic cast.
Yes.
And it's crazy that like, growing up a fan of Western movies and not maybe seeing the ones that were more exciting, like, some of the spaghetti Westerns that I've grown to love now, but just to like, I never hear this movie talked about by people that I talk to that are surrounding movies. It's like nobody that I know talks about it very frequently. So it's really surprising with a cast that good.
So after this, he's basically I guess in a period where he really is experimenting. He's really taking his time to explore other genres, and I think it's good that he did that because by the time um, Spider-Man came around, he was just a really well-rounded filmmaker. Like I think he proved that he had strengths in pretty much everything you would want from a top-tier filmmaker. Like he could direct actors. He's always been a great visual storyteller, but um, he understood pacing, score. Just I don't know. I think he's had a really interesting career arc, and I think that probably starts with Army of Darkness. This whole, I know I've been doing horror, but let me go stretch my legs and see what I can do in these other genres, and then he's kind of building up muscle to do the biggest project of his career, Spider-Man. I think that took a lot of foresight, and I actually think it makes him an anomaly in that case. I don't know another director who's done that.
Not especially not the way he had done it, because you almost saw this like perfect, at least with his first few movies, this perfect transition, where he started on the full horror side in Evil Dead, and then he goes to Evil Dead 2, and then it goes to Darkman, which keeps a lot of the horror elements but starts to get into more of like that action type thriller realm. Still a film I'm very excited to watch. But and then you see this one where it goes much more into the comedy side, but it also goes a lot into that action adventure type movie. And then it's like it's almost like a seamless transition out of horror into the realm of other genres. It's really a unique progression that you see. It's not often that you just see sort of that gradual build. You most of the time you just see if they want to switch genres, then they'll just switch genres, and if it goes well, then it goes well. So very he kind of built that blueprint. If anybody else is able to follow it.
Well, he did what many sorry, something fell. I'll try that again. He did what many directors of his genre, many of his peers, he did what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think every director who starts in a genre naturally wants to do other things and kind of prove themselves in other ways. And all of them at some point try, and the traction they get, it ranges, you know. Like John Carpenter, he's done more than a couple of non-horror movies that I really like that are
Mm-hmm.
well received, but he didn't make that full Sam Raimi transition, I would say. Wes Craven, he's basically had a fucking battle through his whole career to try to do that, and it didn't really go well for him.
You know, the only one that I think could even be, in my opinion, and it could definitely change. I think there have been directors that have been successful outside of the realm of horror. I think James Wan is a pretty decent example because he pretty much
Yes.
saved a Fast and Furious film. Um, so he's a good example of somebody who is able to have success out of the genre, but somebody who's very masterful within it. That being said, though, I think John Carpenter is a pretty close example. He wasn't quite. I don't think he's quite on the scope of where Sam Raimi is for projects that are like completely outside of horror. Things like I would argue Army of Darkness would be completely outside of horror, but if they want to take it outside of that, because it's technically within a horror franchise, you know, with the Spider-Man movies, with the most recent Doctor Strange movie that seems to be getting some great reviews. I mean, he's just The Quick and the Dead. Another example is just, you know, I don't know if somebody has done. First of all, nobody's done a transition like he has done. But at the same time, uh, this level of success that he's found in that transition is something that's very hard to match. It's very hard to compare to anything. And maybe Carpenter's as close as you can get with, you know, some of the films like when you started to get into, you know, Escape from LA, Escape from New York, you know, even Big Trouble in Little China, I guess, had some elements of horror, if you want to call it that. Not really. So he had that success, but not quite what Raimi was able to do. There's nobody like the guy. I can tell you that.
The thing about John Carpenter, and I love the man, but unfortunately, a lot of these movies that you just mentioned of his, they were not well received at the time for
Correct.
whatever reason, and I think that's ridiculous. I think it's criminal in some cases. I don't understand why Big Trouble in Little China bombed. It's a great mystery. Uh, but it probably just comes due to a number of factors that I think you could spend a whole episode on.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that like Sam Raimi is more talented than all these guys. I think if anything, he was just a little more calculating. I think he probably just um, laid out a pretty serious roadmap. Because I think there's a reason um, he didn't do Army of Darkness right after Evil Dead 2. Well, or that might have been because he wait. Oh, I forgot. He had to do Darkman first to get it funded. I forgot that.
Well, it worked out.
I can't wait to cut that out of the review.
Oh God, that's funny.
No, but I think what I'm saying is there is being a master of your craft and there's being a master of your career. And I think Sam Raimi really was a master of his career.
Wow. I don't think I could have put that any better. That's exactly. I'm definitely stealing that in everyday life. That's an incredible way of putting it. Yeah, he was a master of his career. I think in a lot of ways master of his craft too, but sort of just the craft of filmmaking. And I completely agree. I can't I could not have found better words myself.
Now, of course, he would have, unfortunately, Spider-Man 3 did not go so great. But it's kind of remarkable that up until that point, he'd been making movies for a long, long time. He didn't have anything that bombed outside of Crime Wave, which didn't even get released technically. It got released in two theaters, and that was obscured. That was hidden. That was like a skeleton in his closet. So he didn't have a public failure for like 30 something years.
Now, uh, how what's the timetable that we're adding here? Because didn't he make The Gift? Was
Yeah,
he
but
the director of The Gift? Did that bomb?
I don't think that bombed. It didn't do huge numbers, but I'm talking about some kind of, you know,
Like a terrible effort, basically.
terrible movie, something that bombed, something that people give you a shit for, something that the critics panned.
That's fair.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't seen The Gift.
I haven't seen the. I've heard of The Gift, and I've heard of his. Didn't he? I think he did an Oz movie too.
I think we
I
talked about that. That's my least
Yeah,
favorite of his.
I can imagine it's not very good. But I mean, from what I understand, and I just pulled up a page for him here. I mean, his filmography is pretty. I mean, it's pretty sealed tight. Once you reach a certain point, there's just. I mean, he's got one obscure film somewhere in there that he directed with a few other people, and he's got a few of those throughout his career, just little shorts or small things. But all of his actual feature films I mean, they're all things that if you haven't seen them, you've probably heard of them. And I mean, none of them have a super low rating. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think Spider-Man 3 is very underrated. I think it gets way too much shit. So if you just ask me personally, the only one that I don't like is Oz. And everything else, I go from liking to loving.
Can't disagree with you there. I can definitely say that it's been a long time since I've seen Spider-Man 3. Don't remember loving it. I've gone on record in saying that his Spider-Man films are not my favorite. I'm just not a big Spider-Man character guy. Um, I'm just not a Spider-Man guy. But I grew up with the movies. I enjoyed the Macho Man Randy Savage in it a lot, and as Bonesaw, I really enjoyed that. But I need to rewatch them. I think that I'll get a lot of feelings, and I played the video game a lot as a kid that was based off the movie, so I think I'll get there. But I think I just hit a point where early 20s, like when I first hit like about 20 years old, that the movies didn't connect with me in the same way, and I think I need to rewatch them again now that I'm a couple of years have passed and I can kind of get back to it. And but I can't speak on it yet because I don't think I'm giving it as fair of a chance. I have heard a lot of love for Spider-Man 3 over the last few years, though, especially as more Spider-Man films come out.
People are coming around.
Yeah,
People
people are
are,
coming around to it.
yeah, they're waking up.
The getting woke on movies. Yeah, I've seen it a lot more, honestly. I really have. And I hope it continues. I don't ever want to see a movie that somebody makes with care and with love, and somebody like Sam Raimi. I don't ever want to see that movie, have any contention. Ideally, I'd like to see every movie that deserves to do well, do well. And that's with critics and box office. So if that can come around with the critics, that'll make me very happy, despite what I feel about it currently.
Okay, so we have talked the career of Sam Raimi. We've talked these three Evil Dead movies. We've touched on the requel, which he produced. So, are there any final words, anything left we can say about the master that is Samuel Raimi?
Well, I'll say this much, and I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to talk about Sam Raimi movies, just because they don't. I feel like they haven't hit me the way that they should until more recently, and I think that's where some people who have appreciated some of the genius that he's put in his movies over the years can come in. But I just want to say, with Army of Darkness, closing out our trilogy as well, our trilogy of podcasts covering his work, it's been a great ride, just going back and being able to rewatch these again and just sort of have a new perspective on them, a new point of view as I watch them. And with Army of Darkness, for me, this was the one film that nothing really changed. I had a great time, just like I did the first time watching. I enjoyed nearly everything about it, just like the first time I watched it. And it's still a movie that I would recommend to anybody that just wants to sit down, put in a movie, grab some popcorn, maybe crack a cold one, and just enjoy a fun and just have a fun movie, have a great time, and enjoy yourself. And I hope that people will follow that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just me and Sam Raimi's movies go so far back. I mean, he literally is the reason that I want to be a filmmaker. So, I mean, when I put it that way, I don't even know how to sum it up in some kind of concise fashion. But all these episodes have been a huge love letter to his career, and I'm sure I'm going to go talk about Darkman, talk about any number of his other, let's say, kind of more cult movies on this podcast. But these are the movies that really launched his career and continue to bring people together and have people appreciate him and his contributions to movies, to cinema. And I think you just see his talents on display so effectively through all of these films, culminating in this one. I think he just showed just how fun his movies are. Like, let's drop all pretentious bullshit, whatever. No matter what I've said here, fact of the matter is nobody makes movies that are more sincerely enjoyable than his. And that is something that I consider to be an amazing accomplishment.
It's high praise, sir. Very high praise. He'd be very happy to hear those words from you.
So donate to the podcast, Sam.
Produce the podcast, Sam Raimi. What are you waiting on?
No, I'm gonna set up a Patreon, and if Sam Raimi doesn't donate in the first 24 hours, I am deleting all of these episodes.
Where we're gonna replace them with the hating on Sam Raimi episodes of all-nighter discussions. That's gonna be the next few episodes. We're gonna shit all over every single movie he's ever made.
That overrated hack, Sam Raimi. Okay, man, this was a lot of fun. Well, President CM, I want to thank you again, as always, for coming on, talking about these movies. It's always a great time when you're on the podcast. And gosh, this was like a big project for us. This is a whole trilogy. I'm very happy with how this all turned out, and I can't wait to keep talking movies with you, man.
Yeah, especially as we look forward to potential fun projects coming up and relating to talking movies, wink wink, and potentially fun times ahead of us. Thank you so much for having me back on this podcast. I have a blast every time I'm on. And I can't thank you enough for bringing me on, let me talk something I love so much about. So thanks for having me on such an awesome podcast, and always happy to come on and talk movies with you.
I'm very grateful for that. So y'all, if you enjoyed this content, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel at All Nighter Discussions, or follow the podcast on any major podcasting platform, Spotify, Apple, etc. My feature film, The Curse of Professor Sardonicus, is out on VOD right now. That's Vudu, Apple TV, Amazon, the works. So if you wanna stop hearing me ramble and just go see me make a movie of my own, that's the way to do it. All right, this is Gabe Tice, and until next time, y'all.